and welcome to Occupolitics, a MuggleNet.com podcast about politics in the wizarding world of Harry Potter. I'm still in LA enjoying the Leviosa Convention's afterglow and the last moments before we have to check out of our Airbnb. Before we get to today's show, I'd like to thank our newest patron, Keon Foley. This podcast is possible because of our patrons, so thank you. If you are here and haven't listened to the first installment of The Girl Who Lived, you are missing out. The first episode of the bi-weekly patron-only series, The Girl Who Lived, is out now for patrons and regular listeners alike. But the rest of the series will be reserved for patrons only. If you'd like to become a patron, go to patreon.com/Occupolitics to get access to early releases of episodes, custom monthly stickers, recipes, Muggle Studies videos, and The Girl Who Lived, the podcast series. Thank you for your support. Today's episode of Occupolitics was recorded at the Leviosa Convention in Hollywood on Saturday, June 29th, 2019. My panel was titled Harry Potter and Fantastic Beasts, a roadmap to community organizing and resistance. Enjoy! Today I'm going to be talking about a model of community organizing that is called Emergent Strategies. So when we think about a crisis, right, we think about a war breaks out or there's a threat. People in governments in civilizations are more often than not going to look for a strongman solution, and that's how we get fascism. So, I mean, obviously that's not happening at all today in the world. But the Harry Potter world asks us to think about grassroots organizing in a way that really fits emergent strategy. So in emergent strategy, you want to be like super flexible and you want to be able to adapt to your environment. So what do the Order of the Phoenix do? They adapt to their surroundings. They, like, there's a new attack, we will work collaboratively to find out what happened. So another part of emergent strategy are like the roles of the facilitator. So when you think about a community movement, you don't want to think about the community movement that Adrienne Wilson spearheads, because that's a bad community movement. That's not something that's collaborative. So when you have a very charismatic leader in a movement, that movement is 9 times out of 10 destined to fail. So what happened to like Death Eaters without Voldemort? They fell apart because they had the one charismatic leader. I know that like Dumbledore's army and Order of the Phoenix have like their own quote-unquote charismatic leaders, but as they grow and as they adapt, they become more about the members and what the members want the future to look like. So that's how actually Harry Potter is a good example of how grassroots organizing can be incredibly successful or not have anything without its leader. So we talked about adaptation. Now, there's independence and decentralization, which is, again, not having that one figurehead. And we see that also with Newt Scamander. He's more of a facilitator, because a facilitator is going to show you how to do your job or be successful in doing something rather than telling you how to do something. So when we think about Newt Scamander and Fantastic Beasts, we can see him as nurturing people rather than segregating people and telling them, no, I know you're good at this one thing, but I wanted you to do 10 other things, right? So a good facilitator makes everyone's jobs easier. So you want to have someone who, like Harry, is like a reluctant facilitator because he's so like in his head and he wants to not be like noticed, right? But then he's like, no, but I also want to help these people, I guess. Fine, I'll do it. So he grows into that role. And that's also a good lesson. We don't all have to be there yet. We can just join a movement and not have to think about, damn, I wish I had more experience on something. So if a movement is trying to exclude you or trying to tell you that your vision now is the vision of the leader, like you can't have your own say in what the vision of a group is, then that's not a good group to start off in. Because if not, you're basically getting the Death Eaters. Like, they don't have a vision that they contributed to in joining the movement. They were just following someone else. And without that, the group like flounders and fails. So we have something like Dumbledore's Army that Harry started, but then Neville took kind of like an ownership of like the heart and the mission of Dumbledore's Army, and it gets resuscitated in book 7 to help Harry get into the castle, which wouldn't have happened if like there wasn't this sense of community around it. So now there's also fractal awareness, which is kind of like, you have to bear with me for a second, it's really woo-wooey. So it's like this idea that patterns in nature are replicated elsewhere. So you can have like a very specific small pattern that can be seen in the galaxy, right? But that also happens in society. So when we're thinking about growing our own movements, and like grassroots obviously starts very small, we have to model the behaviors we want to see within our communities to see the effect later on. And I have a very bad example of this, and that's the Tea Party in the United States. So the Tea Party in the United States did not start out as this big thing. Like, I know it seems like it came out of nowhere for us, but we weren't like at the ground level with them. We weren't like engaging them in conversation because that's not something that they wanted to do anyway, right? So they start building these like small communities based on shared values and ideals that we may not share, right? But that propelled them to make change. And the small change that they were able to do in 2012, 2013, 2014, we're seeing the big effects right now, sadly. So like all the efforts they did with NRA, all the efforts they did with like pushing the party more to the right. So that's community organizing, what can happen if we don't kind of counterbalance that. And then, again, be adaptable. There's this thing called nonlinear and iterative change. And then, so when we think about, have you guys been to therapy? Anyone been to therapy? Here? 2, 3? Yeah. So when you start therapy, you're like, I'm gonna get better. And like in 3 sessions, I'm just gonna be cured. Like, it's gonna be great because my therapist has not seen someone like me because I'm great. And then you start feeling better and better and better, and then something happens and you're like hit rock bottom even worse than you thought you had. And you're like, motherfucker, what is happening? I thought I was gonna get better, right? But that's because growth is not linear. So as human beings, like our organizations are going to grow and we're gonna have growing pains. And we also have to adapt to changes. So let's say our grassroots organization is about free and healthy access to abortions, which is like a super hot topic right now, right? So if a new policy comes up that further restricts abortion, then your priority needs to be like the newest thing, not the one that you were working on before. So like adaptive and change, and we're going to like need to read the opponent's strategy, and like we can also see that in Harry Potter. We can see that in how everyone always had to be on the lookout for what was like the triage at that point. And then within community organizing, so the whole point of community organizing is not relying on structures of political and social structures define who you are or what you're allowed to do, right? So you want communities to be able to shape the way we're going to live in the future. So we can't also, and this is the hardest part that I don't think the series kind of talks about, we can't apply that same level of justice to the people we're dealing with. So let's imagine that instead of Voldemort dying, that they could have just taken him to Azkaban. They're taking something that was like a grassroots movement and they moved it to the state, right? So in grassroots movements, specifically in this module, what they say is that transformative justice is justice that feels good, which is a really weird way to think about justice, but like to not think of the punishments that the state would put on someone as the absolute best thing that you could do to have justice. So an example would be, instead of locking up a child for something, then you do crisis intervention instead of turning them over to the state. Because without that, then without transformative justice, then you're going to keep perpetuating the cycles of violence that you're presumably fighting against. So
it's kind of like how with like gun control, for instance, people are like, mental health services versus like more reform.
So Tabitha, what we were saying was that when we think about gun control, instead of like taking away guns, we should think about mental health. So that would be like a grassroots type of organization, because our system is very punitive. Like what they would want to do is get as more arrests as possible and get as much bail money as possible, because that's also like a capitalist machine for a lot of people, right? So transformative justice is like justice that feels good and like that fits with our idea of like rehabilitation versus punishment. A good example of how the ministry did this was, we just covered this on the podcast, Barty Crouch saying like, hey, no one's going to get any like trials or anything. You're going straight to Azkaban if you're a suspected Death Eater, like no questions, gone. So that's kind of like a punitive like method of the state that a grassroots organizer might not use. So like if Dumbledore like ran across someone, instead of like turning him over, he might have, using like transformative justice, get as much information as possible from this person in a humane and safe way, and like give them the opportunity to like inform on the Dark Lord, Severus Snape. So something like that, where it's met with more empathy than punishment. Floor is open. Yeah.
I mean, I know for me, being in a human rights related course right now and having just done a course on violence, enslavement, and human rights, one of the things that we ended up bringing up was, something like the cash bail system in the U.S. and the role that capitalism is also playing in perpetuating violence in terms of, things like, the prison-industrial complex and, the funding of weapons and, so forth.
The prison-industrial complex has been called like the new slavery, because that's kind of the system that it's operating under. The cash bail system actually is even worse. I'm not saying worse in terms of like humane treatment, but worse in the ways it profits from people. Sometimes you don't get that money back, even if you weren't, put in jail or anything like that. So apparently, I know I heard this somewhere, apparently you get maybe 10% of your money back with a bailout system. So there's a lot of companies that are profiting from the bail system, from also like the lenders that loan you like a little bit, but with like a high interest, like those cash stores. Those are those are things that are getting deregulated. So
I want to ask about SPEW, because it is really fascinating to me, like little Hermione's efforts and how they really fail for most of the series.
Okay, I was thinking a lot about that, obviously, other than like my shirt, but I feel like when we think about SPEW, that's a good example of a movement that fails because not everyone comes together to share a vision. They come together because she tells them to. And she can have like the best. I mean, she can have like the best heart about it, but that doesn't make it like a community, like organized situation. It's more of like, well, she's right, but she won't let us like pitch in.
Yeah, like that was what I guess identified as like the biggest thing that was wrong about it was she never asked the house elves what they wanted.
Yeah.
But then by Deathly Hallows, when she treats Creature with kindness and like sets the example for Harry and Ron to treat him with kindness, then during the Battle of Hogwarts, Creature like leads the charge of house elves and like fights for their side. So like she had to learn, I guess, to like be more open and inclusive of the people that she's trying to help.
Yeah, and that's such a great point, because one of the things that the book touches on, I mean, this book, Emergent Strategies, is like everything. Like this is just like a blurb, right? It touches on this idea that a movement is wrong if what you see are, let's say it's a movement about immigration, and the only people who are in front of the cameras and doing the work, like the people in the force are, and this it might be like confusing, and I'll explain, it would be like the people who are optically migrants. Instead of them also being the people organizing, leading, like lending their voice to the solutions, because when we think about I work in nonprofits, right? So I can think about 10 like different neighborhoods that need help, and I can think, oh, clearly they need like a new rec center. That would be great for them. That would solve all their problems with like, I don't know, childhood development, let's say, right? But then I don't listen to those people who live there, who would tell me something like, actually, that might be nice, but what we need to aid us in child development is X, Y, and Z because of these reasons you can't see. Mm-hmm. So instead of being the saviors, we also need to listen to what people need, and because they won't understand what they need and what they can use to get out of the situation they're in, but not us telling them this is what you need. Yeah. Like, whether you like it or not, you're getting a new rec center. I don't care if you needed like groceries, whatever, like die, So those are the things that when we listen to communities, we need to also listen to what resources are available to them and also what they think they need the most. There's a ton of books on this, obviously. Yeah.
So I guess to, add on to this idea of, not wanting to be paternalistic and not wanting to have that sort of imposition on folks who are maybe marginalized, who, non-marginalized actors are saying, oh, we know what's better for you because we're the professionals, or worse, we're the white people. But
same thing, right?
Given that so many, Harry Potter fans specifically have moved into the realm of things like activism, through, for example, the Harry Potter Alliance is probably the biggest, but also, through some other smaller, nonprofit or otherwise, like, just like fan groups in general, like meetup group sort of things. What do you think specifically within the fandom as, activists, people can do better to improve their praxis in that regard?
I have a lot of answers for this, but I'll start with like the easiest one, and maybe that's also hard for a lot of people. The easiest way you can impact a movement is by donating. So that means donating your time, donating money, trying to amplify their voice. A nonprofit I'm very involved in is the Rape Crisis Center in San Antonio. I know one of their development people, and I know that they do. So obviously you research, who you're giving your money to. You don't want to just give it to like a think tank or something like that, probably. And the work they do is victim-centered, and they are advocates of the victim, and they listen to the victims. One of the things they found out by listening to victims survivors, is that they would have to pay for their own parking in hospitals. They would have to like wear gross like ratty things that were in like lost and found to go back home because their clothes are taken out the hospital, so they don't have anything to go back home in. So the Rape Crisis Center is working on getting funding for the parking, getting some good options for people to go home in and not have to get stuff from the lost and found. So again, invest time, again, invest your money, and also if there's something that you see that needs to be filled out, like you want some kind of change, find like people who are like-minded and build something. Anyone else? Yeah.
So who is your favorite Harry Potter character activist? Because mine is Arthur Weasley, or Newt Scamander, but mostly Arthur Weasley.
I just want to hear why Arthur Weasley, and then I can prepare my answer better.
So Arthur to me is like he's because Wizard Society is like deeply anti-Muggle, where they just know nothing about Muggles. They don't care. They don't want to know, and that to
there's
me
an us versus them mentality.
Yeah, and like that seems to be the root of their problems to me because they've had like 3 fascist uprisings in the 1900s, and that are all based on that like deeply rooted anti-Muggle sentiment. And Arthur Weasley is one of the only wizards we meet who's like not just like tolerating of Muggles, but is genuinely interested in them and sees that like these are brilliant people who aren't that different from us and deserve our respect and our protection, and not just to be like kind of.
Yeah, and he's one of those characters that like walks that line very beautifully because being a person of color myself, like I know that like that line of like, are you fetishizing me or are you like treating me like a human being? I can't tell, right? So he walks that line, but like he comes very close to teetering to either side sometimes. So I think activism-wise, I think my favorite would be Newt Scamander because he's like the reluctant activist. He gets roped into this thing. He's like, but there will be creatures. Fine, I guess we'll do it. But also that he understands the magnitude of relationships. So like grassroots activism is all about maintaining relationships and making sure that everyone feels safe and honored and heard. And he, the reluctant activist, is the best at it of every character in the series because he's able to bring people from different backgrounds together, like without even trying. You can see Dumbledore recruiting, right? Because he's like, yeah, Molly and Arthur, come join my team or whatever. Like you can see Dumbledore having to recruit people, but Newt doesn't need to because he has like, even his brother was like, oh, what are you doing? And he's like, fine, I guess I'll join you, like, because he's good at the relationship building because he's a good Hufflepuff. But what we're saying is Hufflepuffs are going to do all the grassroots. And we have concluded. No, just kidding. Anyone else? Yeah.
My question is there a movement that you think would be important to establish in the Harry Potter universe that hasn't quite been discussed in the books or movies quite yet?
I think obviously how magical creatures are treated is a big one. I can totally see something like that being necessary, like the way they treat dragons like Gringotts is like despicable and like all these other things. But Fantastic Beasts kind of goes into that a little bit, I guess. I'd like to also be like have a wizarding world that is more like female powered, female centric. So maybe a little bit more feminism thrown in there instead of having like characters like Rita Skeeter's whose entire job is to tear down people, especially women. And like Molly Weasley being casually like misogynistic against Hermione sometimes. So like that kind of stuff. So like the microaggressions are sometimes what hurts most. I know at least from my experience that if someone I trusted says something like vaguely racist. I'm like, oh, trapped door racism. Great, here we are. It's very surprising from you. Great. That kind of stuff. So.
That's interesting about the just those little kind of anti-feminist pockets within the Harry Potter series. And one of the biggest ones that I found was there's this contrast between, and obviously this is like, it goes a little bit beyond this, but it's, if you look at Molly Weasley and Bellatrix Lestrange and this huge duel they have at the end where you have Molly who's, you know, the mother, and, you know, she's pure and good and victorious over this, like, you know, Bellatrix Lestrange, who's like
childless.
Yeah, exactly.
And therefore evil, obviously, like.
Right.
Her ovaries shriveled up and died inside her, and she's evil now.
Yeah.
To add on to that, there's like the whole split between Narcissa and Bellatrix.
Yes,
especially over Draco. Like, you know, Narcissa wants to protect him, and Bellatrix is like.
Well, she doesn't have children. She doesn't understand, obviously. Like that idea that like a non-parent can't understand peril. Like Dumbledore's usually putting students at very like perilous situations. Obviously, he's not a dad. Duh. Like so. Yeah, but Narcissa is being like inherently better because she cares about her son. But isn't it worse that she cares only about her son and not the other children at Hogwarts? I think that's more of like something that we can read into, but it's not something that's depicted in the series as such.
Yeah. It seems like a way that when you're aware of a potential issue and you don't do something to act on it, you can cause sometimes accidentally more damage than somebody who, you know, maybe like Bellatrix, who's just like so off in her own ideology that she doesn't know or care what's happening to other people.
And also I think when we think about like mental health in the wizarding world, that's something that also needs a little bit more of coverage, right? Because we have someone like Bellatrix Lestrange who definitely needs some like counseling and some help, but she's not getting that because she was in prison and like she was in that punitive state.
Actually, to add on to this, I did an essay once about if Barty Crouch Jr. was actually a Death Eater or if he went so crazy in Azkaban from the Dementors. And there's actually, you know, there's been lots of studies that if you tell a person in prison enough that they're guilty, even if they're innocent, they'll actually start to believe it. So
you tell anyone anything long enough, they'll start to believe it, which is why encouragement from parents to children is like one of the best things that people can do. To be like, you're very smart, and you start believing it, like, you know. But if you're being told like X, Y, or Z, you're gonna believe it also. Which is again like going back to mental health, like when people like suffer from low self-esteem or like question themselves too much, like there's this thing they call like a reparenting, which is like you looking at yourself as a child and telling yourself things that you wish you'd heard, and like that is supposed to help like cope with those like and erase those memories and like reprogram yourself. So yeah, so tell anyone if they're anything enough and they'll believe it, that's for sure.
So I was like, the fifth book is definitely always interesting because of the whole like, you know, like Harry's state of mind the entire book, because, you know, he just, you know, with Cedric, he went through a really traumatic event, and like, and, you know, and it's like Dumbledore distancing himself from him and all this like thing, and like you don't really realize how much it's affecting him and how like angry and like lost he's getting until like Luna's like, oh yeah, no, if I was Voldemort, that would be my tactic, just like completely like cut off all your relationships and like, you know, just ruin your mental state. Because it's like, Voldemort doesn't really attack him too much physically in that book, but like...
But it's mental, yeah. So anger has been linked in teenagers as a symptom of depression and anxiety. So Harry definitely is depressed and anxious for most of the series.
Yeah, for sure.
And we don't talk about, you know, there's no discussion about like grief with him or how to like get over grief, or like he never sees a counselor or
Luna's the closest he gets to a counselor.
Yeah. Well, because it's always the emotional labor of a woman to be there for men. We need more feminism in learning as in the real world also, but
yeah.
lot of people make the argument that like gender inequality and racism and like all of that doesn't exist in the wizarding world. Do you believe?
I actually, obviously not. So I think that obviously this is a world that is constructed, but it has to be constructed out of something, and the facsimile is, British society. So you have like the United Kingdom, which in itself is very divided, and there's like a lot of racism and prejudice even within like Scotland, Ireland, like just England, like all of it. And I think that you can tell like that because everyone's like always self-identifying as something, and even within the houses, there's like some like, oh, but you're a Gryffindor, we can't be friends type situation, right? Which can be coded as racism or as some kind of just community, I guess. I do think there is like definite coding of certain characters as white in the series, even though we don't know their origin. I don't know, I mean, if I were Jo, I would still probably be doing what she's doing, right? Because I'm just like, I was ambiguous enough, right, guys? Because you don't want to admit that you're wrong.
Yeah.
But it happens.
Yeah, I think like the discriminations that we see in the real world were just kind of replaced with.
But like Muggle-born or like
Yeah.
Muggle or whatever, yeah. And that's that's definitely part of it, and like the way that power is distributed in the wizarding world, like so you doing magic is just a way in, but how well can you do the magic is another way to like stratify. But also, how long has your family been in the wizarding world? That's like another way of kind of differentiating who's worthy and who's not.
That was also like an interesting like observation for me because it seems very imbalanced. Like wizards can consume whatever they want of Muggle culture whenever they want, but Muggle-born wizards have to leave all of that behind to be a true wizard. So like Hermione,
It's like a migration, basically.
she has to like even she goes to the extreme because she's in a war and like she makes her parents forget about her and just completely like cuts off from the Muggle world. But even without that, like it's not like Dean hanging up his soccer poster in the Gryffindor dorm and everyone's like, what even is this? Like
Yeah, it's a huge culture shock. Like, that kind of, and I think it's complicated, obviously, because some of the characters are not just white, right? So there could be layers to this, and I wish we would have had more time to explore that about how like that stratification works in the wizarding world. But yeah, so everything is centered on like power and like the purity of something, which is like fascism. Just your casual fascist.
yeah.
I do really like how, like with like the Weasleys and the Malfoys, it does explore classism a lot too. Because like, I mean, that's always been like a big issue for me because I did grow up on welfare growing up, but like kind of seeing how like the Weasleys are like so like, it's like all because they're blood traders and all that, but it's like it's also because, they are poor, they are like working class, and it's like.
Yeah, I think there's something there to do a little bit with the prosperity gospel, a little bit, and like I know Harry Potter is not like a religious, like there's no religion in it, but this idea that you're doing well, therefore you must be a good person, you're doing badly, you must have done something to deserve it, like financially, like the anointed ones, like Harry finds out all this time he's been rich the whole time, like even. Like, it could have just been like, well, he had a modest, like, thing where he could just go to Hogwarts for, like, the next 7 years. Like, that was a choice that was made. So, it's kind of like, well, then why is Malfoy so, like, rich and the Weasleys so poor? Maybe they deserve that. Or at least that's how he views it, right? So, and there's still a lot of people that look at people that way. Like, oh, no, I'm blessed. You're not. You must have done something. Which, like, capitalism, guys, not religion. Another thing that she talks about in her book is trust, and how when you're building a movement, right, you have to trust who you're doing it with. So that reminded me of the time where Hermione's like, just sign this contract. nothing will happen to you. Right? So she like made someone untrustworthy, even like by the way that she was sneaking that in, and then revealed herself even to be untrustworthy. So the person obviously got sneak written all across their forehead and scarred for life. But she also revealed herself to be untrustworthy. So like that's another thing where that could have failed and that could have blown up.
I think it'll be dark sometimes.
It got really dark in here. All right, I usually end, if no one has any more questions, I usually end asking people what media they've been consuming, so if you guys could share what you're excited about lately, that'd be great. Yeah.
So I binge watched all 5 seasons of Schitt's Creek in 3 days.
Wow, that's a crazy feat.
Yeah, I really love it. It's a really, it's just one of those shows that's just really nice, and that's very refreshing. So I tend to watch a lot more of that. So like Parks and Rec, The Good Place, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, yeah, just nice.
Those are nice recommendations.
I've been watching several times Good Omens.
So good.
Yes. So I've rewatched it 3 times now, and it came out a month ago. So that's where my life has been.
I've been book media, I guess. I've been reading through Madeline Miller's books. They're
I love that.
Circe and Song of Achilles. They're more kind of more inclusive takes on classical myths, very LGBT.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
I still have to read Circe, but Song of Achilles was so good.
It's very beautiful.
I've been right now I've just kind of been rewatching all of Stranger Things and all of Orange is the New Black since there's new seasons coming out. Which I forgot how much I love Stranger Things. It's just such a well-made show.
Yeah.
And I like how it kind of feels like a really long film. And I also just really love how season 2 tackles the mental health of Will too, because I'm that poor boy. But I guess new stuff, also Good Omens and the Tales of the City remake too.
And for me, Black Mirror. I finally watched San Junipero the other night, and I cried so much, and I tried to get my parents to watch it. I was like, you guys need to watch San Junipero, you guys should watch, over and over and over again on WhatsApp, and they're like, no, we're watching Designated Survivor right now. I'm like, it's an hour out of your time. It's not going to ruin your Designated Survivor for you.
And I do Black Mirror, and I'll do one episode every month or 2, or just space them out. So then it's they're not over yet. It's a good show.
I read The Hate U Give recently.
It's very good.
Very good. I really loved that.
I think it was really good too.
And They Both Die at the End. Adam Silvera. I love it. I love that book so much.
I thought you just spoiled The Hate U Give for me.
No. Okay. The book is called They Both Die at the End. Spoilers for that, I
Right.
I thought you were just gonna fall on the ground.
I haven't read it yet. It's on my list.
It's such an interesting book title, though. I was like,
Yeah.
what?
No, yeah, it's a really, really good book. And Adam Silvera is really good. I need to buy the rest of his stuff. Yeah.
All right. Okay, so I've been watching Outlander. Seasons 1 and 2 are on Netflix, and they now Stars or Showtime, one of those two. Stars has my money now because I added the channel on Prime, so I can finish watching. I was like, but what happens next?
It's probably a good marketing tactic just to put the first couple seasons so that people get into it.
Waiting for season 5.
I know. I'm not going to be at San Diego Comic-Con, and it makes me so sad.
But you're gonna be a Comic-Con, so it's okay.
Which I believe is Dragonfly and Amber, I think. I don't know, there's so many books. She's got a 9th one coming out too.
Yeah.
Wow.
Does she do the series do like 2 a season?
No, each season is
It's one book?
is one book.
I need to get on it. Maybe I should just read while I wait. Such excited. And then I got my friend into it, and we've been like messaging each other. We're like, she just finished season 2, the entire season. And she's like, what? And I was like, this is how they got my wedding. I told you would buy the thing on Prime. I warned you before you started. Has anyone watched Fleabag?
Yes.
I've been meaning to.
So good. Season 2 is perfection.
The priest.
The hot priest.
Andrew Scott.
Oh, is it Andrew Scott?
Oh, yeah.
I definitely have to watch it. I love Andrew Scott.
I mean, but she's amazing.
Yeah.
Phoebe Waller-Bridge is amazing.
She's such a good writer.
Season 1 was good. Season 2 was perfect.
I know.
Yeah, so that same friend was watching Outlander. I got her into Fleabag as well. And we just like downloaded all the scripts from Phoebe Waller-Bridge, and we're like, we're gonna learn how to write like her, because she's amazing.
I love reading her scripts, especially like when you watch along and like see the differences and stuff and how it translates to screen.
Mm-hmm. And she has the best facial expressions.
I know. The fourth wall breaking.
I was just
On the
gonna say.
subject of facial expressions, though, that's what turned me off of Dairy Girls. I can't watch it. The main girl's facial expressions, like the jokes are funny. Like the jokes are perfectly funny. Like it would be fine if I just like watched it in another tab, like not looking at the screen and just the audio, because the jokes are really funny. It's really cleverly written. But the main girl, like the way she contorts her face, it's just like physically painful for me to watch.
Dairy Girls is very well written. That's another good one on Netflix. That's it for the show today. What did you think? As always, you can tweet at me at Aciopolitics. You can find us on social everywhere at Aciopolitics, and I'll be back next week. And finally, we'll get to Goblet of Fire chapter 28. Until then, politics managed. Support this podcast for as little as $2 a month on patreon.com/Aciopolitics. Follow the pod on social at Aciopolitics on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Email me at info@aciopolitics.com with your thoughts, theories, and favorite moments of the series. You can also leave me a voicemail to be featured on the podcast at 915-996-1699. Theme music is Think Big by Scott Holmes. This podcast is brought to you by MuggleNet.com.